Number 10. Captain Marvel. In the comic book Avengers issue 197, published in 1980, Carol Danvers, who is then known as Miss Marvel, discovers that she is pregnant. However, she has no recollection of how it happened, and the baby grows at an alarming rate. Shortly after that, in Avengers issue 200, Carol gives birth to the baby, who also grows up at an alarming rate, and names himself Marcus. The Avengers seem excited about the birth, despite the bizarre circumstances of it, and Carol is made to feel like she is basically overreacting by not sharing in their enthusiasm and excitement for her. As Marcus grows, it is revealed that he is actually the son of Immortus, a ruler of Limbo, not Magic's Limbo, but a different Limbo. Immortus, by the way, is one of the alternate timeline incarnations of Kang the Conqueror. Immortus had impregnated a woman he had plucked from time, Marcus's mother, and Marcus was trapped in Limbo until he could be born on Earth. Marcus had basically brought Carol to Limbo, specifically mentioning that she actually reminded him of his mother, a little weird, and used charm and his father's subtle manipulation devices and methods to impregnate her so that he could be born on Earth. Yikes. In the end, despite the large piles of red flags, many piles of red flags everywhere, Carol decides randomly that she actually feels empathy for Marcus, not knowing whether this is coming from herself or actually from his influence over her, and her friends and colleagues, her family, the Avengers, just basically smile and wave goodbye as she rides off into the sunset with the man who she is most definitely a victim of. Her lover turned son turned sort of love once more, Marcus Immortus. Oh boy. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love when we talk about some of the more questionable things that have been done in comics, be sure to let us know by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9. Photon. While Monica Rambeau may finally be seeing some appreciation in the comics today, this wasn't always the case. I would say she started off with a bang in the comics, but then shortly after was kind of shafted multiple times over. Needless to say, she did recently get a 5-issue mini written by Eve Ewing, no relation to Al Ewing by the way, which I am super excited to read, but I personally think Monica deserves a whole ongoing series all her own. That's how awesome and powerful she is. Number 8. Hawkeye. Hawkeye is often thought of as just being a guy with some arrows who has really good aim. Kinda is that. But the fact that he's one of the few human members of the Avengers who doesn't have any superpowers per se, other than maybe like really enhanced eyesight, but not superpowered, just like abnormally good in ways that sometimes don't make sense, is exactly why he deserves more respect, more love, more admiration from us all. Hawkeye's Clint Barton doesn't have powers to rely on, and he still manages to keep up with the rest of his teammates. That's pretty awesome, I gotta say. I wasn't always a Clint fan, but I like Clint Barton, he's pretty cool. Number 7. Spider-Woman. Spider-Woman is another character who sometimes gets shafted in the comics, and she is a character who often gets compared to her seeming male counterpart, Spider-Man. Although truth be told, in canon continuity, Spider-Woman actually is older than Peter, and therefore in comic books history anyways, she was actually Spider-Woman before Peter was Spider-Man. She's canonically older, so I mean, she has a kid and everything. Something Peter has never really even been allowed to do permanently as a character, settle down, have kids, and grow up, all that good stuff. Although I would say that the fun of Jessica Drew is that she might be adulting really hard, but she never really fully grows up. She's always fun, sassy, and still figuring out so much of her life as she goes through it. To me, she's always been not only fun and badass, but also a relatable character, which is why I feel like she deserves to be featured more and get more respect from Marvel writers and fans alike, hence why she's on this list. Number 6. Black Knight. Honestly, probably one of the most underappreciated heroes we have as leader of the Avengers is the Black Knight. That's right, he was a leader of the Avengers, everyone. The Black Knight is a character who feels like lately he has faded into obscurity somewhat. I thought maybe with Kit Harington, made famous for his role as reluctant hero Jon Snow in the series Game of Thrones, playing Dane Whitman in the Eternals movie, we might actually see a resurgence of this character in the comics, and I was hyped for that, bolstered by his MCU appearance. However, while Dane's role as the Black Knight was teased at the end of the film with the appearance of his ancestral cursed sword, the Ebony Blade, we have yet to hear anything about the development of his announced series, and even Harington himself says he's basically in the dark on what Marvel's plans might be involving this character. So it seems like we might have to wait a bit longer for Black Knight to get the respect he so deserves from modern day fans, but hopefully that's coming at some point soon. Like, come on, Marvel, give me the Black Knight series, give me something, I want it. I feel like it could be cool and it would be very different. Number 5. Vision. Vision hasn't really had a major focus on him in some time. I love that he agreed to join up with Carol's Avengers and as such is getting more time on the Avengers team in the present day, where he can once more be in the spotlight. But I do feel like there was a little period in there where Vision wasn't really doing much of anything. Vision might seem like a boring character devoid of personality because he's an android, but I would argue that at times he is maybe more human than the rest of his teammates. There are moments in the comics where for me he reminds me of another android that I know and love, Data from Star Trek. Often it is his humanity that seems to motivate him and also seems to be something that Viz struggles with as well, both in realizing its existence within himself and in accepting that human part of himself. Like, I mean, you gotta realize it before you can accept it, but even when I feel like he's kind of like, oh, maybe that's what's going on, I feel like he's not willing to fully embrace his humanity. I know he's an android, but sometimes he's just some really human stuff, guys. Number 4, She-Hulk. She-Hulk recently just had her own solo series, which as far as I've read thus far is amazing, by the way. I haven't finished it yet, but yeah. That series unfortunately just ended, and honestly it bums me out. She-Hulk is Jennifer Walters, who contrary to some very loud opinions, is not just a gender-swapped version of the Hulk. She is her own character in her own right, being Bruce Banner's cousin, who he came to shortly after his transformation into the Hulk, kinda seeking some help from Jen. However, during his visit, Jen was attacked by criminals who were worried that she, as a lawyer, was going to take down their boss. A very real threat, since Jen is actually a pretty great criminal lawyer, or was so at the time anyways. Now she's more into superhero lawyering, but still. After this attack on her life and Bruce being forced into giving her an emergency blood transfusion to save it, Jen Walters was forever changed into the sometimes monster, mostly hero, She-Hulk. She-Hulk has had a tumultuous path throughout the comics, having her highs and her lows. She has had long runs and short runs, and I'm kinda disappointed she isn't doing more these days, especially considering she also just got her own Disney Plus series, so you'd think that would help to give her character a comic book boost, but not really apparently. Her recent series didn't even make it to 20 issues sadly, and like I said, it honestly was great. I'm not fully up to date, but trust me, the issues I've read are really good. You should check it out. It's like classic She-Hulk. It felt so like original She-Hulk times. Ugh, so good. Number 3, Captain Marvel. I would argue that in a way, Carol is only recently starting to get her due. Captain Marvel has been and always will be one of the strongest Avengers around when it comes to the team. She is a cosmic powerhouse who has overcome a ton of adversity, but when it comes to her getting the respect that she deserves, she has had honestly a rough past. There was the whole thing with Marcus Avengers, see Avengers 197 through 200 for that fiasco, and then there was Civil War II, which saw Carol deal with some major character issues regarding how she was presented and written at that time. She became the villain of the story that should have honestly been equal in terms of which Avenger fans sided with, like in Civil War I. However, that isn't how Civil War II went down. Lately, however, Captain Marvel is finally getting the respect she deserves as she has recently become the leader of the Avengers as we move into this new Avengers era. I am excited to see this kind of development happening for Carol, who has always been a strong and intelligent character who understands how to best utilize and motivate a team. So see her in that leadership role, it's perfect for me. Number 2, Blue Marvel. Blue Marvel has barely made any appearances recently in the comics, despite being one of the greatest powerhouses that we've ever seen. It's downright rude if you ask me. If I'm missing something amazing that happened with him lately as well, let me know, but I don't think he's really even been around since the end of the Defenders Beyond series. Before that, he appeared in Doctor Doom series, I believe, but my question is, when are we getting a Blue Marvel series? Huh? Marvel? Give us that Blue Marvel series right now, I want to read it. While Blue Marvel has not been a member of the main Avengers roster, which honestly also seems insane to me, he has been a member of the Mighty Avengers, which is why I'm including him on this list. And also because, come on, Marvel, give us a solo series, do it. Number 1, Scarlet Witch. Only now is Scarlet Witch Wanda Maximoff starting to get the story she has so long deserved. For years, Scarlet Witch was epically burdened by her past and haunted by all of her misdeeds and mistakes she had made along the way. M-Day has to have been one of the worst moments in mutant history, and it's all kinda cause of Wanda. M-Day happened in 2005 in the comics as a result of Scarlet Witch striking out at mutant kind after the events of House of M, where she attempted to create a reality where many heroes were happy. Fortunately, she is now finally moving to a place of healing, refusing to be defined by her past while running a magic shop in Lockhill, New York, with the help of MCU's Darcy, appearing in the comics for the first time. Here, finally, Wanda refused to let her past define her present self. Yes, finally, it's only taken us since 2005. It's taken so long to get to this point, but we're finally here. Ugh. Poor Wanda. Number 10, Hellstrom. Hellstrom is Damon Hellstrom, also sometimes going by the name Damon Hellstorm, the son of Satan. His initial appearance in Marvel Comics was shrouded in controversy due to him being marked as, well, you know, the son of the devil. But in recent years, this all died down with the ultimate dissolution of the Comic Code Authority, which made moral judgment calls on what subject matter could be covered or touched upon, even in comics, a lot less controversial, let's just say, for the most part. Damon's father might not actually be the devil, as a few in Marvel Comics have made claims to this title. But either way, he still has become the ruler of at least a hell dimension, thanks to his birthright. While Damon is not known for appearing on the main Avengers team, he is known for being married to a fellow Avenger in the past, Hellcat, and has been a member of the Savage Avengers, which is why I'm counting him here. Although, lately, I feel like he's been a little less hero-y in the comics. And friends, before I move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that like button? Do it, it's good for you. You know what people say? An apple a day keeps the doctor away, a like a day keeps me at bay from telling you all of that all the time. Number 9, Hellcat. We don't talk about Patsy Walker Hellcat that often on Top 10 Nerd, but lately, I don't know, I've just been in kind of like a Hellcat kind of mood, I guess. Hellcat is definitely a hero who's overlooked on the Avengers roster, and honestly, her history has granted her some pretty unique and fun powers. I had fun looking back into Hellcat's past to be like, oh yeah, she has all these cool things. She has some magical abilities, including the ability to basically like dodge magic and see through illusions, making her hard to target for any magic users. She even can tap into a demonic side of herself, calling upon demonic energy to give her a boost in certain realms and in certain instances. It's conditional, but still is pretty cool. Number 8, Big Barda. Big Barda is another hero who often feels invincible in terms of her approach to heroism. Big Barda herself is a new god. She hails from Apocalypse, where she was once one of Darkseid's fearsome female furies. Despite the fact that Big Barda has recently resurfaced joining up with the Birds of Prey, which honestly I think is a great fit for her, she hasn't been regularly featured prior to this for some time, and I feel like she is a character who deserves more hype in the comics. Heck, even in the movies, where is our Big Barda solo film, huh? I feel like actually James Gunn would probably do a really good job of putting that together, the Big Barda solo film. Oh, I would watch that. I would be in that. I don't know if I'm jacked enough to be Big Barda, but I'd get jacked to be Big Barda. She's so cool. Number 7, Naomi. Naomi is probably one of the most powerful of the newer heroes that we've seen. But do most people even know who she is? Probably not. Amber, do you know who she is, Naomi? Nope, see, there you go. Despite her powers being comparable, and I would argue even stronger than characters like Superman, she isn't often heavily featured in the comics. Unlike Superman, whose weakness is actually magic, Naomi bolsters magic around her. Haha! So magic does not have the same negative effect on her, but instead works almost in the exact opposite way. Her powers allow her to generate energy, which she can then use to boost her powers or any magic or magical beings around her. I'm still waiting for an epic Zatanna and Naomi team up to happen in the comics, and yes, I know Naomi had her own TV series, but she also only got one season of that. And while I've heard some great things about it, overall it seems like the series was met with a mixed reception between audience and critics, so. Although honestly, I gotta watch it. I should watch the Naomi series. Bet I'd probably enjoy at least some of it. I mean, I'm surprised I'm enjoying Gotham Knights as much as I am, even though that show is an experience. Number 6, Killer Frost. Caitlin Snow is truly a character that has sat on the periphery of the DC mainstream for years and years. Yet despite being super cool, pun intended, and interesting in regards to her backstory, whether we're focusing on Caitlin honestly, or even her predecessor, Louise Lincoln, but especially Caitlin, she barely gets featured in the comics, appearing less than 100 times in the last 10 years. If we're talking about Caitlin Snow, that is. And that's even with a version of Caitlin's character being adapted for the CW Arrowverse television series The Flash, appearing as one of the key members of the Flash's support team there. Number 5, Batgirl. One of the weirdest things with DC is how sometimes they just completely leave their stories open to being canon or not, depending on how fans receive those stories. And one of the weirdest incidents of this happening was actually with The Killing Joke. Now, The Killing Joke was written by Alan Moore and was never intended by him to be necessarily a part of the main continuity. And as far as I know, it still isn't even really fully canon, except for one part of that story, the successful attack on Barbara Gordon by the Joker, which left her both traumatized and paralyzed from the waist down. Why this was the only thing we chose to keep from this story, I don't know. But the whole idea of it just feels super weird to me, especially when you consider how brutal and graphic this attack was against Barbara. And Barbara gets no opportunity to defend herself, having been surprised by the Joker's visit while visiting her dad in her civilian form. That being said, she's still Barbara Gordon, so you still would think, you know, maybe she'd do something, but no. This element of the story would change Barbara's life forever, and although I do like Babs as Oracle, it feels like she was robbed of some agency here. In fact, it feels like she was robbed of a lot of agency here, especially when you consider the story was never really intended to be incorporated into the canon. Barbara Gordon has since managed to heal and return to her role as Batgirl while still keeping all the skills she was shown to have as the brilliant hacker and computer whiz Oracle. But I still feel like the fact that she suffered so severely from what was intended to be a story that existed outside of canon is brutal. Number 4, Blackfire. You know you deserve better when I've barely talked about you as a character on the channel when I've been working here for almost 5 years. Yikes, poor Blackfire. I'm sorry, Blackfire. I'm sorry for my part in this. I feel like the thing I'd personally love to see more of from a character like Blackfire is perspective in the comics. Blackfire is the evil sister of Starfire. And I mean, she is really evil. And while she might be one of the best of the worst around, I would say she does ultimately lack some depth. Sure, she is really, really bad, but I've always found her to be more surface level in terms of her motivation behind why she does what she does. In the New Earth continuity, it's the lack of respect and love from her people and her jealousy for her young sister, Coriander, Starfire, who got all that love instead, that basically drives her to do such terrible things. In the Prime Earth continuity, this is less focused on, but still plays a role. And even in the New Earth continuity, I'd like to see more of this in terms of the nuances of Commander's character. I understand her being jealous, I get that, but how else does this affect the way the Blackfire sees not just like her sister, but like the whole world? How else does she justify such terrible actions? Is there any way to get across to her and potentially reach her on an emotional level? I want to feel for Commander, and I often feel she's robbed of any kind of sympathetic perspective, even with everything she went through as a child. I mean, like, I do feel bad for her in terms of like what happened to her, but I just feel like we never really get to connect with her, you know? And I think I'd like to do that more. Is that weird? People are gonna be like, why you wanna connect with this super evil character? Look, I love evil characters, and I think sometimes they have reasons. Number 3, Variant. Talk about women who have been shafted in the comics. How about any of these cyber women that we have seen who have acted as female counterparts to Cyborg? Among them is Variant. Variant only made a handful of appearances before she was tragically just like kind of written out, but I do think her character had promise, and I've always felt it would be cool for Cyborg to have someone to talk to who really gets what it's like to live as he does and share his perspective. Scarlet Taylor is very similar to Cyborg in that regard, being a member of the CIA who almost lost her life on a mission and was saved by being transformed into a cyborg like Cyborg himself was. Number 2, Vixen. Vixen is a supermodel turned businesswoman and in the current continuity, a supermodel slash fashion designer turned primetime show host and animal activist. Well, it's more than likely that Vixen has been an animal activist ever since she possessed the superpower to take various animal shapes. Armed with the Tantu Totem, she can transform into various different animals and harness their own unique abilities and powers. And even without the totem, she currently still can call on at least some of its power, giving herself like animal characteristics basically. Still, despite having this insane amount of power at her fingertips and the fact that she has a pretty cool backstory is stunning, and is a badass, we don't see Vixen featured that often in the comics. When we talk about Halle Berry and DC, that Catwoman movie, look, that wasn't great, but I feel like Vixen would have been an amazing character to see Barry in the role of. Number 1, Circe. While Hecate and Hera are both goddesses, at one point Circe is even more powerful than the both of them, after she takes within herself all of Hecate's power, which allows her to tap into the source of magic. Even without being able to tap into the source of magic, Circe is known for being a fearsome and powerful witch who can easily defeat many of those who would stand against her. And yet despite this, we haven't really seen Circe focused on as a villain in what honestly feels to me like forever. I know it hasn't been that long, but it feels like forever. In Justice League Dark by James Tynion IV, we even get a great look into Circe's tragic backstory that shows us why Circe is as power hungry and ruthless as she is. She didn't necessarily have the easiest life, guys. It comes from a place of self-preservation because she was so cruelly mistreated by the world, and yet despite building up her character, it still often feels like she falls by the wayside at DC Comics. She's such a cool character. She should have her own series, honestly. Number 10, Batwoman. I love Batwoman, but I feel like so many times she honestly gets shafted, especially in regard to her connection to the Bat family. Granted, Kate Kane does often like to be independent from her cousin, Bruce Wayne, but she is still a member of the family, and I don't think she really gets featured enough in the comics. While she has been featured elsewhere in the DC universe, she hasn't had her own self-titled series since 2018, and even then, that series only lasted for a year, from 2017 to 2018, having just shy of 20 issues. You might think, wow, well, that's still a good accomplishment in modern day comics, and you're right. However, when you look at, how long Batman always goes on for, we could have a little bit more Batwoman than like whatever she got, like 18, 19 issues. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you want more DC content from us, do I have good news for you? We have a DC Comics playlist, so go check that out. Number 9, Stargirl. Stargirl is one of those characters that I just feel we don't see enough of in the comics. Now, she has had her moments in the comics, and she did end up getting her own TV show, it is true, but considering that she did have her own TV series, I was kind of hoping we get to see more of her in the comics as a result. And in recent years, since her series started, this hasn't really been as much the case. Now, she has been on the Justice League before, sure, and she's had her own mini-series as recently as 2022, which is pretty good, but we still have never had an ongoing comic series for Stargirl. Like, she's never had a self-titled ongoing. And considering how cool Courtney Whitmore is and how much she is loved by the fans, it's honestly just kind of unfortunate. Number 8, Rogue. So I'm not going to lie, I actually love Rogue's weakness. Former weakness now, I guess. Rogue was one of my favorite characters growing up, and I think what I loved about her so much was the tragedy of her story and her powers. But what's even more, I love the way that Rogue overcame them in the comics. Still, in overcoming her fears to gain full control over her powers, Rogue actually became kinda harder to write, I think. She's just honestly too powerful. This is why I feel like we don't get as many Rogue-focused stories these days in the comics. Sure, she and Gambit have their team-up series going on, but I was really hoping for a Rogue solo story during the days of Krakoa. Jonathan Hickman planned to write one, but ultimately decided against it when he agreed to hand over creative control to his X-Men team, as opposed to staying in charge of the main plot of the Krakoa era as the head of X-Desk. I still really want that Hickman Rogue story, and I'm hoping that we get it, because yeah, I feel like there's so much more we could do with Rogue in the comics. Number 7, Jean Grey. Despite being written as a powerhouse in the comics, Jean has a long history of weird choices being made for a character. And also initially she was basically just written to be a damsel in distress for a lot of the early days of the X-Men. She has constantly been killed off, in some cases to advance the story of her male heroic counterparts, whether that be motivating them to take some action or simply kind of freeing them from their romantic obligation to her. Number 6, Wasp. Janet Van Dyne. In the Ultimate Universe, Janet wasn't treated very well, but I'd also argue in the main continuity, Janet has had it honestly pretty rough. Initially, she was kind of like the sidekick to Ant-Man, and then it was revealed that he was not mentally stable, meaning that Janet, as his wife, had to put up with a lot, considering that Hank was later believed to be undiagnosed bipolar. Not blaming Hank for his own mental illness here, but just acknowledging that as a result, Janet had a lot that she had to live with as his partner and cope with. Eventually, the two do divorce, and then from a hero's perspective, Janet kind of slowly starts to fade away as Hank becomes less and less relevant. Number 5, Iska the Unbeaten. Iska is a super interesting character. On one hand, she's extremely powerful and can never lose. She can even potentially have her power utilized to manipulate the stakes of other competitions that she is pulled into herself. However, this also implies that there are times when she has zero control over her powers, in the sense that she cannot influence the result of an unbalanced battle. In fact, her powers will pull her to serve the side that will be victorious, regardless of whether or not she wants to, in terms of what her mind or her heart says to her. This means that Iska has been forced to turn her back on her own people, the mutants of Arakko, more than once. She's also had to fight against her own family and colleagues before as a result. Although the one thing she can control at times is how she fights in a battle, which I think is interesting. Meaning if she has the option, she can basically try to fight others involved as opposed to those that she's close to. Despite the fact that she has done her best by choosing her opponents to help mitigate how she might be used to turn the tide in a battle, she still is sometimes painted unfairly, I would say, as a villain, when really she is a strong warrior who simply sometimes has no say in terms of her allegiances thanks to her powers. I really hope we get to see more of her and get to dive more into how being forced to turn on her allies at times has truly, probably deeply affected her. Number 4. Wasp, Nadia Van Dyne. Janet even got replaced basically by her adoptive daughter, a younger version of the Wasp, Nadia Van Dyne, who was actually Hank's biological daughter from his previous marriage, who, well, he basically never knew existed. Nadia returned to the US after escaping the Russian Red Room, only to find out that Hank had actually died. She ended up bonding with Janet and ultimately taking up the Wasp mantle with her blessing, also taking her last name as well. I don't mind too much that Nadia is also now the Wasp. I just wish that Janet could also remain relevant while this was going on. In fact, despite Nadia also being a cool new character, I don't even think that she has stayed very relevant since her very recent introduction to the comic, which is unfortunate as well. Wasp is so cool, but yet we can't have any Wasps that are super important lately. Number 3. Madeline Pryor. I'm sure many of you at this point know how I feel about Maddie, but for those who don't, Madeline Pryor is basically the evil clone of Jean Grey, who initially wasn't evil at all. She's also been known before as the Goblin Queen. However, the fact that Maddie was always shafted and then eventually realized that the choices made in her life were manipulated and orchestrated into happening by Mr. Sinister prompted her to basically have a mental breakdown, honestly pretty reasonable, and turn on those who she had once called her allies and friends. That's when she ends up becoming the Goblin Queen. Number 2. Scarlet Witch. M-Day has to have been one of the worst moments in mutant history. M-Day happened in 2005 in the comics as a result of Scarlet Witch striking out at mutant kind after the events of House of M, where she attempted to create a reality where many heroes were happy, but after learning of its falseness, was once again rejected by all those she had actually tried to help here. Pretty devastating, especially when, while Wanda was warping reality here, she was doing so in an effort to not only defend herself, but also make herself and all of her friends happy. In fact, I would argue her friends and teammates, the Avengers, were somewhat, and in fact I would say just full on, complicit in what happened, since they never really reached out to Wanda to try and help her when she was struggling emotionally, prompting her to warp reality, which ultimately led to her wiping out almost all mutants during M-Day. And if you don't believe me that that is the case, I mean, there's literally an alternate reality where if Jessica Jones was there, pretty much none of this would have happened. So yeah. M-Day happened mainly because Wanda was striking out at her believed to be father at the time, Magneto, who she claimed loved mutant kind more than he did his own family. Wanda said the words "no more mutants," and with that small utterance, depowered or destroyed millions of mutants the world over, an action that would cement her as one of the greatest mutant villains in comics for years beyond, despite her long-standing history before this working as a hero. Number 1. Wasp Ultimates. Oh boy, probably the worst one, I would say. Pretty bad. Janet Van Dyne's death in the Ultimate Universe has to be, honestly, one of the worst things. First of all, we don't even show her enough respect to give her an on-panel death, as she drowns during the tidal wave in Ultimatum, one of the many poor victims who perished off-panel, despite, like many others, deserving an on-panel death. But really, when we're talking about those that deserved an on-panel death, Jan is really top tier. She's really high up there, especially considering Janet was actually the leader of the Ultimates at this point. So not only are we off to a bad start here, but then she also gets eaten by the Blob for some reason. It's also weird that they decided to make the Blob do this. I know he's a bad guy, I know he's a villain, but he isn't typically known to like be a cannibal anywhere else in the Marvel multiverse, pretty much ever. The Ultimate Universe had a weird and unhealthy obsession with cannibalism initially. At least, it felt like.
And for this list, starting off at number 10 is Magneto. Starting off this list with the absolute GOAT. Magneto has been around for a long time, and a majority of that time, he was a villain, or at best, an anti-hero. As the number 1 rival of Professor Charles Xavier, Magneto's view of the world is pretty interesting given that he was the child of a Jewish family during World War II, and yet, after years of persecution for being a mutant, he believed his race to be superior to regular humans nonetheless, and that humans should be subservient or destroyed. Under this mentality, he led the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants as well as other groups against the X-Men and the Earth's heroes. Now everybody knows that Magneto is not someone you mess with. He has enough power and enough experience to stomp almost anyone. For example, while he has become more of just a hero nowadays, there's a point where he gets his heart ripped out by a villain called Uranus. But he keeps himself alive by using his powers to keep his blood flowing. He's just that insanely powerful. But being born around World War II and the rival to Charles Xavier, he's been up there in the age department since he was introduced, but always manages to decimate his enemies. Number 9. Cassandra Nova. Sticking with X-related heroes, we have the evil twin, or or counterpart or anti-self to Charles Xavier. Cassandra Nova isn't really a mutant, but she isn't really a person either. She is actually what is known as a Mumadrai, the spirit that is equal to the opposite of a person. Wrap your head around that one. This is about to get wild, so buckle up. Because of the genetic mutant potential of Charles Xavier, his Mumadrai was able to create a physical form for itself when Sharon Xavier was pregnant with Charles, making Cassandra basically Xavier's twin. Now Charles, even as a baby, sensed Cassandra as an evil presence, and he used his psychic abilities to try and take her out in the womb. Cassandra survived though, and so she spent decades as this terrifying mass of cells in a sewer, building herself a new body and planning her revenge on her brother. Cassandra has all the same telepathic powers as Charles himself, plus some telekinetic abilities as well. But being a Mumadrai, she has the terrifying ability to manipulate DNA, breaking it down, copying it, and being able to construct physical bodies. She can even phase through solid objects, regenerate insanely fast, and enhance and evolve other mutant abilities.
Number 8. Talia al Ghul. Daughter of the infamous League of Assassins leader Ra's al Ghul, Talia witnessed the death of her mother and was put in the care of her father. Together they traveled the world, and Talia was trained by her father to emulate his skills and intellect. She eventually fell in love with Batman, and Ra's orchestrated a false abduction of her and Robin in order to test Batman's skills and see if he would be a suitable heir. Batman of course refused to join forces with Ra's despite his feelings for Talia. Talia eventually became the heir and would go on to become the leader of the League of Assassins whenever Ra's is dead. Her and her father have a tense relationship due to her conflicting allegiances and his willingness to sacrifice her for the greater good if needed. She is the mother of Damian Wayne, Batman's biological son and the current Robin. Speaking of which, number 7. Injustice Nightwing. In the Injustice universe, Superman snaps and becomes a real dick. He decides that criminals cannot be allowed to live and sets about exterminating them. When he gets to Arkham Asylum to end the lives of its inmates, Superman is confronted by Batman, Damian's Robin, and Dick Grayson's Nightwing. Damian has always been the most bloodthirsty of the Robins since he was raised by assassins, and he actually has a higher body count than even the Red Hood. So perhaps it shouldn't be too surprising that he actually agreed with Superman that the criminals should be destroyed. This led to an argument with Nightwing that resulted in Damian throwing one of Nightwing's weapons at him. Damian expected him to dodge, but Dick was distracted because of the massive prison break that was happening, and it hit him in the head. He fell to the ground and broke his neck. Batman blamed Damian for Dick's death, because it was entirely his fault, and this led to their relationship becoming damaged to the point of no return, and Damian was taken under Superman's wing, and he eventually took up his fallen brother's mantle as the new Nightwing. This Damian considers Superman more of a father than Bruce ever was, but this is actually just a manipulation on Superman's part to get an ally who is well suited for helping him take out Batman. This is evidenced by how Superman sent the mass murderer Victor Zsasz after Alfred, knowing that Batman's refusal to kill Zsasz even after the death of Alfred would destroy any chance they had of fixing their relationship and solidify Damian's loyalty to him. Number 6. Karai. Last time I talked about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I got their names and weapons mixed up, because honestly, I never got into them as a kid, since, the cartoons stopped airing when I was 2. So I'll have to be careful with this one. Karai in the original comics is an agent of the Foot who comes to New York after the death of the Shredder and sorta takes things over. When the 2003 animated series, which I also never watched because I was strictly a Batman kid growing up, when that series came out, Karai was given more backstory. The audience learned that she was Shredder's adopted daughter who he had taken in and raised after she was abandoned by her parents. He trained her in ninjutsu and she became his most trusted follower, eventually being put in charge of the Japanese Foot Clan. In her appearances in other media in the years since, this new backstory is sometimes adopted, but it's interesting that her status as Shredder's sidekick or co-worker really just depends on which version you're exposed to. In the 2012 animated series, she can also spit venom and transform into a snake girl, so that's kind of fun. Number 5. Terra. Terra Markov was a member of the Teen Titans, but unbeknownst to her teammates, she was actually the protege of the team's arch-nemesis, Deathstroke. She was feeding information to Deathstroke, which he used to capture the Titans, but when Deathstroke's son, Jericho, used his powers of possession to use Deathstroke to free the Titans, Terra thought she was being betrayed by her mentor and snapped, collapsing the hive complex they were in down around her and crushing herself to death. Terra had the power of geokinesis, which means that she could earthbend. She used this power to throw rocks, which she could also sharpen to deadly points with her mind, and could even cause earthquakes at will. She could use this power to rip rock or earth from the ground, which she would stand on and cause to fly at great speeds, giving her the power of flight. Years after her death, she was made a member of the Black Lantern Corps, and her zombified corpse returned to life with the powers of a Black Lantern ring in addition to her usual power set. Number 4. Dexstar. Dexstar started life as a stray cat in Brooklyn. He was adopted by a woman who took him in and gave him a pretty wonderful life full of love and yarn. When his owner passed away in a home invasion gone wrong, Dex found himself back on the streets. When two rather cruel humans decided to have some fun by putting him in a sack and throwing him off of a bridge, a Red Lantern ring, sensing the rage in the cat's heart, granted Dex the powers of a Red Lantern. Dexstar has since become a regular member of the Red Lantern Corps and is probably the most powerful cat in the DC universe. And don't underestimate him. He is extremely brutal and violent and is responsible for the deaths of several humans, a Yellow Lantern, and at least one Black Lantern. Although he has sworn vengeance for the life of his original owner, he still enjoys a good cuddle from his new master, Atrocitus. Despite Atrocitus's typical brutality, he shows a real soft spot for his cat, often referring to him as a good kitty, and flying into a rage if anyone hurts him. Normally I'd say this makes Dex a pet, not a sidekick, but I think he qualifies as both. I mean, Superboy's sidekick for years was Crypto the Superdog, so I think this counts. Number 3. Inertia. Thaddeus Thawne is a clone made up of Thawne and Bart Allen's DNA in the 30th century. His power is to slow down time around him, giving him the appearance of super speed. He operates as an independent villain for the various Flashes, even managing to kill Impulse before being captured by Wally West, who slowed him down to the point where he was essentially a statue, which Wally then put on display at the Flash Museum, forced to look at a statue of the speedster hero he'd killed for the rest of time. He was eventually freed by Hunter Zolomon, aka Zoom. Zoom then took Inertia under his wing, renaming him Kid Zoom. Although very powerful, his time as Kid Zoom was cut short when he killed Weather Wizard's son, resulting in the Rogues teaming up and taking him out with extreme prejudice. Number 2. Christoph Bernard. When Dr. Doom returned to Latveria in Fantastic Four number 247, he discovered that a revolution had taken place, and he had been replaced by a man named Zorba Fortunov. He came across a young boy named Christoph and his mother, who were still loyal to their former leader. Christoph's mother was killed by a robot, and once he had regained control of his homeland, Dr. Doom took in Christoph, raised him, and eventually made him his heir. Christoph is a super genius, much like his teacher, having a knowledge of science and magic that apparently rivals even the original Doom. When Doom was killed in battle, Christoph was made the new Dr. Doom, but the Doom bots transferred Doom's memories into Christoph, making him think that he was the real Doom. This of course led to trouble when the real Doom returned, and upon defeating Christoph, Doom had him deposed and sent into exile. But the two eventually patched things up, with Christoph stepping in as Latveria's interim leader whenever Von Doom is unavailable. Number 1. Nimona. Nimona is the lead character of the graphic novel of the same name by N.D. Stevenson. It tells the story of a young girl who decides that she wants to be the sidekick of the greatest villain in the realm, Ballister Blackheart. She has magical powers that allow her to shapeshift. She can use this power to disguise herself as someone else, or to become any animal she wants. She's only limited in the fact that the animal has to be a real creature, but that's not much of a limit, as she lives in a world where dragons are real. She also has an incredible healing factor, having healed arrow wounds and a decapitated head with little to no trouble. The story soon goes in a direction where it is clear that Blackheart and Nimona are operating as villains in order to liberate their homeland from an evil dictatorship, which of course opens up a lot of thematic ideas of what actually makes people villains, but it is a cool read that has been adapted into an animated Netflix film, which is scheduled to be released sometime this year.
Alright, kicking off the list at number 10 today is Martian Manhunter. Now look, Martian Manhunter may be one of the main Justice League members, but he gets slept on way too much. I will always reference this when describing John's power, but there is a panel from the New 52 when Martian Manhunter is fighting off all the members of the Justice League at the same time. With his left hand, Manhunter is using his shape-shifting ability to turn that hand into a massive spiked club and whacking away both Cyborg and Green Lantern. With his right hand, I think it's safe to say he's showing off his super strength, as he's got a power grip on the lasso of truth, and I'm assuming he's just resisting its power. Behind him is Aquaman, who's like jabbing John with his trident, but the trident is just phasing through him because John can become intangible. Then we got Superman, who's like flying around the fight at a decent distance while Manhunter uses his heat vision to keep him there. And then the funniest part is Batman doing absolutely nothing, just picking up the Flash, who seems to have just been knocked down. It's almost a perfect display of his abilities, but leaving out a handful, and one of the biggest. John is the most powerful telepath on Earth, and one of the most powerful in the entire universe. Martian Manhunter has been called the most powerful being on the planet, and he's at the top of the list of people that Superman is afraid to fight. Number 9, Booster Gold. Poor old Booster Gold, the greatest hero that you've probably never heard of. His day job involves traveling through time and space, ensuring that events that are meant to happen do happen, and he absolutely rocks at it. There was even a time that Booster went so far as to create an entire second persona named Supernova for himself, while simultaneously faking a psychological breakdown and eventually faking the passing of his own Booster Gold identity, all while he went and successfully replaced several major superheroes who were missing at the time, including Superman. The thing about Booster Gold is that in order to protect himself from other time travelers, Booster has to come across as a failure, an absolute dumpster fire of mediocrity. Somebody that no one will ever want to bother with remembering anything about in the future. That's why Booster has this shtick of being greedy, incompetent, and attention-seeking, which actually kind of began as genuine, but has long since been a facade. He willingly endures a life of ridicule from the people he protects without them knowing, because when you're dealing with time travel, being the butt of the joke actually gives you an advantage. Booster is also called upon to maintain events which are pretty much less than excellent, like ensuring that bad things that have to happen actually happen. For example, he routinely guards a little German baby boy born on the 20th of April 1889 in a small town in Austria-Hungary from other first-time time-traveling superheroes. He does all of those things because the alternative is the complete unraveling of all time and space and the destruction of everything. Number 8, Granny Goodness. Stepping away from Marvel for a moment, Granny Goodness is probably the complete opposite of anything we would describe as goodness. She was originally one of the lowlies, which is basically the peasant class on DC Universe's Apocalypse. From a younger age, she was taken by Darkseid and raised and trained to become head of the Shock Troops and the Female Furies. She has the responsibility to bring young warriors from other worlds to fight each other to earn the right to be trained by her. But Granny Goodness also has multiple orphanages where she both trains and disciplines younger individuals looking for potential warriors for Darkseid. Now, being a resident of Apocalypse, Granny here does have quite a bit of power. She has superhuman strength, speed, durability, and senses, as well as invulnerability and an advanced immune system and immortality. But being immortal doesn't necessarily save you from looking old as hell, which is why we get Granny Goodness. Number 7, Horticulture. You know, sometimes a group of villains comes along that just kind of makes me smile. And Horticulture, who first appeared in X-Men Volume 5, Number 3 in December 2019, are one such group. Horticulture is described on their wiki as a group of agrochemists, biotechnologists, and eugenic engineers who specialize in the genetic manipulation and propagation of all things botanical. So, to me and my tiny brain, I take that information and translate it to, it's a bunch of old plant scientist ladies. Because that's what they are. It's a bunch of older ladies who are seeking to radically depopulate humans from the Earth in order to bring the Earth and nature to a state of balance. With the climate the way it is right now, it's actually kind of an understandable cause, even if it's utterly insane. Using their know-how, they made biological modifications to themselves, like resistance to telepathy and extended lifespans, but they also developed technology to manipulate their environment, inhibit mutant powers, and generate illusions on men. But they also have experience as computer programmers, being able to access the Krakoan gateways and trade information with the villainous anti-mutant group known as Orcus. Number 6, Old Loki from the MCU. Alright, I'm going to step away from the pages of comic books altogether here. During the MCU's Loki show, Loki gets sent to the Void, where the whole place is basically filled with other alternate versions of himself. But he specifically became part of a group of 4 other Lokis. Boastful Loki, Alligator Loki, Kid Loki, and the topic for today, Classic Loki. Classic Loki had a similar story to regular Loki from the Sacred Timeline, but when confronted by Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, this Loki decided to use duplication magic to survive the whole thing. He then spent a hell of a long time on a remote planet, ashamed of the nefarious things he had done over time. When he finally tried to return to see his brother, Thor, who he missed, he was an older man, and them meeting caused a divergent timeline, getting himself pruned and sent to the void. He has probably one of the best moments in the show. When Sylvie, Loki, and Mobius try to escape from the void, and the reality-consuming Alioth tries to stop them, Classic Loki uses his magic to create a true-to-life, massive illusion of Asgard itself, all while this weird version of Ride of the Valkyries was playing in the background, distracting Alioth and giving me just straight-up goosebumps. Like, I am actually getting them right now just thinking about it. Like, it was such a cool moment. Satisfying. Number 5. Ra's al Ghul. Ra's al Ghul was born around 700 years ago, and thanks to the Lazarus Pits, he has been able to keep his body in working order. But he discovered the pits when he was an older gentleman and keeps the look of someone with a significant amount of years to him. After he came in contact with the pits, he eventually became a master martial artist and a master fencer, gaining a massive amount of wealth, and he started creating organizations to rid the world of crime, with his first being called the Demon, which the later League of Assassins is a branch of. Rage's purpose within the League of Assassins is to eliminate all evil in the world by destroying all of humanity and just starting all over. Obviously, that mentality means he routinely has run-ins with the superhero community, especially Batman, who he helped train. Rage has had many plans over the years that tried to destroy the world, and he has also beaten the entire JLA when he discovered Batman's notes. Now, with his years of experience and his vast amount of accumulated resources, this older fellow is a massive threat to both the heroes and the world. Number 4. The Joker. During the absolutely fantastic 3 Jokers storyline, we learn there have actually been 3 Jokers plaguing Gotham over the years, and among the 3 of them is the Golden Age Joker, and he is clearly much older than the other 2. Now, to be completely transparent here, whether this story is canon or not is an area of debate, so it's up to you if this one counts. But the Golden Age Joker, known as the Criminal, is the only one of the 3 Jokers to be a predominantly serious crime lord, and he even says that laughing and smiling is physically painful for him. Another thing that makes this entry a little arguable is that of these 3 Jokers, we don't know which one, if any of them, is the Joker. Even if only one remains in the end, the best part of this story is the uncertainty about which one is the one who started it all. Now, seeing as the Criminal is the oldest, classic version, he seems to be the one who started it all, creating more Jokers to mess with Batman. But the other 2 Jokers have been featured in incredibly important Batman stories as well. The comic really explores all of it, and if you haven't yet, make sure you check out Batman 3 Jokers as soon as possible. Number 3. Maestro. The Incredible Hulk has certainly been through the ringer in his decorated career, but few versions of the character are the living embodiment of that fact, like the Maestro. An alternate version of Bruce Banner from an apocalyptic future, this version of the character is far more intense and complex, but also much older. The best way to explain Maestro is to say that he is basically a smarter, older, villainous version of Dr. Bruce Banner, with all the powers and abilities of the original, but with a touch of nuclear radiation. He has much more of a cosmic and spiritual side to him than the normal Hulk does, but he is also twice as strong as Hulk is, and he retains all the intelligence of Bruce Banner, but with years and years more experience. Despite all that extra strength, brain power, and experience, he still gets outmaneuvered by the Hulk, who sends Maestro back in time to the site of the gamma bomb that created them. But even then, the Maestro's spirit remains on the bones left behind after the explosion went off and he came back to life. Number 2. Agatha Harkness. Like a few of these villains, when we first met Agatha Harkness in Fantastic Four number 94 from October of 1969, she was already elderly. She started out as the nanny for the newly born Franklin Richards, and using her magical powers, she even saved the Fantastic Four from the Frightful Four and a handful of other villains, and also helped Franklin when his powers first started to emerge. But she went on to have an interesting relationship with the Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff, but also her mother, Natalia Maximoff, Maximoff. That's because this sweet nanny Agatha is actually an incredibly ancient sorcerer who was around to remember the sinking of Atlantis nearly 18,000 years ago. And she was probably the most powerful of the original witches during the Salem witch trials, an event that she actually supported as she thought it would cull the weak magic users who held them back. Agatha, like a lot of older villains, is pretty damn complex. She has helped out heroes on multiple occasions, but she's also done some pretty sinister stuff. But there's no doubt that she is much stronger than both heroes and villains first assume. Number 1. Baron von Strucker. Baron Wolfgang von Strucker was born in the 19th century, so he ain't a young fella by any means. He fought with the Axis powers during World War II alongside and under the Red Skull. He was a top villain at the time, not just for Captain America, but more prominently as an adversary for Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos. And that carried through after the war ended, as Strucker was instrumental in the rise of Hydra and then became the Supreme Hydra. He was even responsible for the corruption of S.H.I.E.L.D., using Hydra to completely take over large parts of S.H.I.E.L.D. itself. When Captain America returned, and then the Red Skull did as well, Strucker began to lose his leadership role within Hydra, and so he faked his own passing, choosing to instead manipulate events from the shadows. Eventually though, Strucker got the Death Spore virus, which is why he is on this list. He's old, and many people don't know he has this particular enhancement. While he is an excellent strategist, a highly intelligent, exceptional hand-to-hand combatant, swordsman, and marksman who uses Hydra tech to live longer and be in top physical condition, the Death Spore virus bonded Strucker's DNA with the Death Spore itself, enabling him to be revived after passing away. He hasn't aged since getting the virus, he heals at an incredible rate, is invulnerable to minor injuries, resistant to toxins and disease, and he can even release the Death Spore virus from his body at will, taking his victims' lives nearly instantly if he chooses to.
At number 10 is Sam Wilson, aka the Falcon. Thank you to Rodney Lindsay 849 for suggesting him in part 1 of the series. Sam Wilson is the guy who became the new Captain America after Steve Rogers hung up his shield. But here's the thing, in the Avengers, even though he took on Cap's mantle, he's not exactly getting the spotlight he deserves. See, Steve Rogers, the OG Captain, is a tough act to follow, no doubt, but Sam's got the heart, the skills, and the wings to match. He's proven himself time and time again, but fans still don't give him the credit he's due. Let's not forget, he's carrying on the legacy of Captain America himself, and that's no small task. But nevertheless, Wilson's a great successor. This guy's got some mad skills. He can fly like a boss with those wingsuit thingies, plus he's got his vibranium shield that he rocks just as good as Cap did. But for some reason, he's often just pushed to the sidelines. At number 9 is White Tiger. Thank you to Victor Sage _. You might not have heard much about her, and that's honestly a real shame. White Tiger, aka Ava Ayala, made her appearance in the Ultimate Spider-Man and some Lego Marvel games. She's got a pretty cool backstory too, being the sister of Hector Ayala, the original White Tiger. But here's the thing, she's been kind of left in the shadows. With her agility, strength, and that insanely underrated mystical amulet she's got the potential to be a real force on the Avengers team. There's also that whole fling with Peter Parker that fans seem to be really into. So it's high time we get to see more of White Tiger in action. She's got what it takes to be one of the strongest Avengers, and it's about time she got the recognition she deserves. If you're enjoying this video so far, please support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. I would really appreciate it.
Number 8, Firestorm. Where do we even start with Firestorm? The main version of the character is Ronnie Raymond, who is fused with his professor, Martin Stein. But there are a lot of other versions of Firestorm, a lot of whom are either one person or different fusions of other people. It's annoyingly complex. The character, as you might guess, has pyrokinetic abilities plus durability, flight, reflexes, and super strength. But the character's main thing is that they can rearrange the molecules of matter. Now this ability is obviously incredibly OP, and it would simply take one story to make him completely god level, but for the most part, writers kind of misuse him. Potentially, this character could transform entire planets into whatever he wanted. With this power, Firestorm's done some pretty godlike things. For example, Firestorm manifested a pink bunny mascot suit out of thin air around the villain's Skull Crusher. He's turned explosions into a Jack-in-the-Box and a cement truck into a giant teddy bear. It's kind of hilarious, but like low-key, absolutely insane. On a way less hilarious note, he also turned a girl into salt when he was resurrected as Deathstorm. And in Doomsday Clock, Firestorm accidentally turned a crowd of Russian protesters into glass. But outside of matter manipulation, Firestorm has had some impressive feats, like surviving the nuclear meltdown that originally created the hero and absorbing all the excess radiation. And another time, Firestorm survived a straight-on nuclear explosion. An alternate version of the character called Deathstorm was able to absorb and capture 3 different Justice League teams into its own Firestorm matrix. And in Infinite Crisis, Firestorm was able to seal a multiversal rift. In case you haven't noticed, we have kind of moved away from physically unstoppable characters to characters that are just pure science fiction gods. Number 7, John Constantine. John Constantine is a really fun inclusion for this list because he is extremely powerful and not powerful at all at the same time. John can wield magic for sure through years and years of learning, training, traveling, but he doesn't have any kind of magical affinity or any kind of beneficial magical family heritage. John relies on actual magic as a very last resort, and the magic he knows how to use isn't anything to scoff at. He has even, very momentarily, been able to hold back Dr. Fate, but using magic comes at a cost, and he knows this. So what Constantine prefers is trickery. Lies, deceit, traps, his wits, weapons, artifacts, backup, and calling in favors. John smokes, he drinks, he's in his middle ages, and he ain't in the greatest of health. He can throw a punch, for sure, but most people are a physical match for him. But at the same time, he has been able to trick, outsmart, or overpower gods, demons, and angels. Batman, Superman, Darkseid, Swamp Thing, Dr. Fate, the Phantom Stranger, the Spirit of Justice, the Spectre, the Spirit of Vengeance, Lucifer, and even the Presence, who is basically DC's version of God. He tricked them all. He tricked the Presence into curing John of cancer and granting him divine protection by selling his soul to 3 separate Hell Lords who would start a civil war over his soul, which would spill out onto Earth and into heaven. Don't sleep on this bad-mouthed middle-aged man. Number 6. Atom Smasher. Thanks to exposure to radiation, Atom Smasher is already an incredibly impressive looking guy. He stands at 7 foot 6 inches tall, and he is jacked. This guy's bicep is probably bigger than my torso, which isn't really saying much. But his real power is being able to grow even bigger. He has the power of atomic dispersal, meaning he is able to control the distance between his atoms, increasing to anywhere from 28 to 60 feet in height. His mass, durability, strength, speed, and stamina are all increased even more so as he grows. Now, Albert Rothstein made his superhero debut under a different name. Initially, Al went by the superhero alias of Nuklon, and he was an original member of the superhero team called Infinity Inc. But following in his godfather, the Atom's footsteps, Albert took on his Atom Smasher name and joined up with the Justice Society of America in JSA number 1 by James Robinson. The thing about Atom Smasher that makes me think he deserves better is his entire interaction with Black Adam. When Black Adam joined the JSA, one of its members that he happened to get close with was Atom Smasher, and he even convinced Smasher to leave the team and start an anti-hero team instead, which led Smasher down a darker path, even becoming part of the Suicide Squad for a time. He has been redeemed since, but I don't think he ever really deserved that in the first place. Number 5, Hawkman. Hawkman is a doozy to talk about. Essentially, he has 2 main origins. He was either a space cop or a reincarnated prince, and sometimes both. Basically, Hawkman's secret identity is Carter Hall, an archaeologist and a museum creator who is actually a reincarnation of the ancient Egyptian prince, Khufu. Now Khufu, who would become known as Hawkman, discovered an alien spacecraft from the planet Thanagar powered by an anti-gravity element called the Nth metal, which transformed his soul and doomed him and his love to be reincarnated over and over again throughout time. Some of his incarnations include Brian Kent, the Silent Knight from 5th century Britain, Conrad von Grimm, the son of a blacksmith in 14th century Germany, Captain John Smith of the 16th century English colony in Virginia, Hannibal Hawks, the Nighthawk in the American Old West, Detective James Wright, a Pinkerton detective in the early 20th century, and finally, Carter Hall himself. Whether it's because of his really confusing origins, or maybe because people don't realize how cool this character actually is, he just kinda seems to suck. And when I was a kid, I thought he was super cool. Oh, to be an innocent, sweet child again. Number 4, Raven. Teen Titans and Teen Titans Go brought the new Teen Titans to a big audience, and one character who really stood out is Raven. She's been like the character on that team that everyone seems to like regardless of who you are. Seriously, you can't go to a comic book convention without seeing someone rocking a Raven cosplay. She's like the goth icon for superhero fans. Raven's super popular, and it's kind of strange that DC hasn't done more with her. She's got an awesome but also absolutely terribly upsetting backstory, crazy strong powers that could literally destroy all we hold dear, and a personality that fans absolutely adore. Honestly, she could totally be DC's version of a much better and more interesting Scarlet Witch without any trouble. It's just frustrating that DC isn't giving her more love in the comics like they do in the shows. Number 3, Aquaman. The ocean is a genuinely terrifying and interesting place. As such, the Atlanteans of DC Comics possess a few advantages over us regular humans. They have super strength, speed, endurance, and durability, all in order to help them survive the mind-boggling pressure at the insane depths of the ocean at which they live. But Aquaman himself is a royal Atlantean, which means that he is a super Atlantean. His strength and durability has allowed him to close the Marianas Trench, which I don't even know how that works, go toe-to-toe with powerful foes like Martian Manhunter, Lobo, and Wonder Woman, and tank blasts from Starro. His speed, which is often forgotten about, allows him to swim at 10,000 feet per second, and he can move even faster without the pressure of water drag, allowing him to dodge bullets and catch lasers. But Aquaman has quite a few other advantages. His control over sea life has helped him in a large majority of his fights, with his underwater allies coming to his aid and helping him do things he probably couldn't do alone, like creating a massive tsunami with whales. His telepathic skill is actually quite impressive as well. Some of my favorite feats include him telepathically controlling a Green Lantern ring, reading the Martian Manhunter's mind without permission, and controlling a space dragon. For a while, he also had a hand that was a hook, and then that became a magical mystical water hand that could do a whole other level of feats, but I'm kind of out of time, so we're moving on. Number 2, Animal Man. Thanks to an encounter with some rather strange aliens, Bernard Buddy Baker gained access to the morphogenic field, otherwise known as the Red. This field basically allows Buddy to absorb and use different attributes of nearby animals while still being a human. So, he has been able to move his eyes independently like a chameleon, he's been able to ram against a speeding car with the abilities of a rhino, he can fly by tapping into birds, he's regenerated a whole lost limb by tapping into an earthworm, gained the strength to lift a car by tapping into a spider, and he's ran at 75 miles per hour by adopting the abilities of an ant. But his abilities have done some even more surprising things, like for example, when a villain cut Buddy off from the nearby animals by putting him in a room, he took on the attributes of the bacteria inside that villain's body, allowing Animal Man to duplicate himself. He can even tap into the attributes of extinct animals like dinosaurs, which has allowed him to punch out a T-Rex and survive being crashed into by a plane. Over time, he's received power boosts that allow him to use multiple abilities at once, and then to even use the abilities of any animal in the universe, like when he used the power of a quote sun eater, which let him fly across the galaxy in an instant. Number 1, Icon. While Milestone's Dakotaverse isn't currently a part of the DC universe, the New 52 previously merged the universes together with the Wildstorm reality. Icon returned as the most powerful Milestone character in the new Earth M setting. He was originally an alien named Arnis, whose ship crashed on an Earth plantation. Arnis was raised as an unwilling servant named Augustus Freeman until his memories and powers developed during the Civil War. He spent 100 years working as a lawyer before Raquel Irvin convinced him to become the costumed hero Icon and set an example for others. Icon has incredible strength that rivals Superman's. Icon also has incredible reserves of energy that he can project in various forms. He's one of the best Superman-like characters, and yet I feel like he just hasn't been given any real good times to shine recently. It's like DC kinda just forgot about him and a lot of the Dakotaverse alongside him.
Number 10, Scarlet. When Jason Todd's Red Hood first returned from the dead, he was much more villainous than he has since become. Yes, he was a vigilante, but in the context of the stories he was appearing in, he was a Batman villain. In Battle for the Cowl, he even tried to murder both Tim Drake and Dick Grayson. After Dick Grayson became the new Batman while Bruce Wayne was dead, Jason created a more flamboyant Red Hood costume and even took on a sidekick to help him in his insane and murderous war on crime. Sasha, otherwise known as Scarlet. Sasha was the daughter of one of Professor Pig's henchmen, who tried to leave Gotham when things were getting too intense. Pig found out about this and decided to capture the man and his daughter and turn them into members of his Dollatron minions. This process involved disfiguring surgeries and brainwashing. Her father was converted, but Pig was stopped before the process could be completed on her. She smothered her father in prison and was rescued by Jason, who took her on as his murderous sidekick. This career was short-lived, and she is not as effective as other sidekicks. However, she did manage to defeat and capture Damian Wayne through a strategic use of a taser and a knife. When Jason was defeated by Batman and Robin, Scarlet fled town, never to be seen again. Number 9, Harley Quinn. Harleen Quinzel was a psychiatrist at Arkham Asylum who fell in love with one of her patients, the Joker. He manipulated her into breaking him out of prison and joining him in a lifestyle of murder and mayhem. Harley meant nothing to the Joker, but he was able to use his manipulation skills to keep her around for years, being his most consistent and trusted assistant. She took on his clown gimmick as her own, through makeup or by a dip in a chemical bath, depending on the continuity. Despite being a psychiatrist, Harley is a skilled martial artist and acrobat, being able to defeat most of the foes she comes across with relative ease. She eventually realized how toxic her relationship with Joker was and went out on her own, eventually becoming more of an anti-hero at this point. Joker has since taken on a new protege, Punchline, but really, she's just a replacement Harley that DC created because they couldn't use Harley as a straight-up villain anymore, so why talk about it?
At number 8, we got Hercules. The Avengers have housed a plethora of gods, you guys. But you see, when people think about godly Avengers, usually it's Thor that hogs the spotlight. But hold on a second, because Hercules deserves some serious recognition too. He's got the strength, the charisma, and an impressive set of abs, yet he often plays second fiddle to the god of thunder. Imagine being a god yourself and still living under someone else's shadow. Not cool, right? Like, even when you go into Herc's fandom wiki, his featured quote is literally a self-comparison to Thor about how whatever Thor can do, Hercules can do even mightier. It seems like no matter what, if Hercules is a part of the conversation, Thor has to be too. Or Maestro, I guess, but you get my point, right? Hercules deserves better. He's taken on cosmic threats, lifted entire mountains, and shown that he's more than just a pretty face. Let's give Herc some time to shine, Marvel. After all, the Avengers could use a bit more divine power in their ranks. At number 7 is Loki. Wait, what? Now, you might be thinking, why are you even considering Loki the literal antagonist of the first Avengers movie in a discussion about the Avengers? Well, it's because Loki is one of those characters who doesn't neatly fit into the good or bad box. He's kind of like that friend who's mostly a pain, but sometimes has moments of real kindness. When it comes to the Avengers, we often focus on the big names, but Loki's different. He's a trickster, a troublemaker, and he's caused his fair share of chaos, but deep down, there's a part of him that wants to do the right thing, and frankly, that's what makes his character so fascinating. So is Loki good or bad? Well, it's not that simple. See, people aren't just good or bad, they're a mix of both, and Loki here is no exception. He's made mistakes, but he's also shown that he can change and do the right thing when it counts. And so in the end, whether you think Loki deserves better or not, there's one thing for sure. He's a character who keeps us guessing, and that's what makes him one of the most intriguing Avengers of them all. And number 6 is Quicksilver, recommended by Nelson SC9670 and Rodney Lindsay 849. Again, Quicksilver bit the bullet way too early in the MCU. I mean, don't get me wrong, Wanda's cool and all with her reality-bending powers, but her brother Pietro, aka Quicksilver, well, he definitely got the short end of the stick. See, he's got super speed, which is super awesome, but here's the deal. Quicksilver didn't get nearly enough screen time or development in the movies. I mean, sure, he had his moments, but they were just glimpses of what he could do. With a power like super speed, there's so much potential for epic cinematic action sequences. I mean, we've all seen the X-Men scenes. He could have been a real game changer in the MCU battles. Plus, he's also got that snarky attitude that could have added some humor to the team. So let's give Quicksilver the love he deserves, and maybe, just maybe, if fans cry loud enough, maybe we'll get another shot in the MCU. At number 5 is Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones is an Avenger who's been on the sidelines for way too long. You might have recognized her from her Netflix series, but in the comics, she's a powerhouse. Super strength, durability, and some mean investigative skills. Yet she's often overshadowed by big names like Iron Man and Thor. Now, while she's not out there space battling aliens, her street level heroics are just as vital. Imagine if she had just a little more screen time and a chance to shine alongside the heavier hitters. Jessica Jones deserves way more recognition and a bigger role in the MCU. At number 4 is War Machine. Now, many people just think of War Machine as sort of an Iron Man light, but he deserves way more credit than that. I mean, come on, his name is literally War Machine. The guy's suit of armor is loaded with firepower. Sure, he doesn't have the same level of tech or even charisma as Tony Stark, but he's a vital member of the team. Think about it. War Machine is a military asset that brings a different set of skills to the table. He's got the experience, the discipline, and the tactical know-how. Plus, the suit of his can go toe-to-toe with some serious threats. So let's not forget about War Machine when we talk about the Avengers, because he's definitely one of the strongest and deserves a lot more recognition. And number 3 is Jack of Hearts, recommended by Robert Pike 5670. Now, the Jack of Hearts isn't your typical Avenger. See, he's got this super crazy cosmic power, like he can manipulate energy and stuff. Sort of like he's a walking nuclear reactor. But here's the thing, he's always kind of been underrated despite his insanely powerful superpowers. He's been in and out of the Avengers, never really getting the spotlight he deserves. I mean, okay, just imagine having that kind of power and not being in the spotlight. It's like having a Lamborghini and just keeping it in the garage, am I right? The Jack of Hearts is definitely one of the strongest Avengers, period, and it's about time he got the recognition he deserves. And number 2 is Madam Web. There's one character who's been lurking in the shadows, and I'm not talking about a stealthy superhero. I'm talking about Cassandra Webb here, aka Madam Web. Now, Madam Web is kind of like the unsung hero of the Marvel Universe. See, she's got this crazy ability to see into the future and across the multiverse. Basically, she's the ultimate guidance counselor for Spider-Man. But here's the thing, folks, she's been nowhere to be found in the movies. Not in the MCU, not in the Spider-Verse films, nada. I mean, come on, with her powers, she could have helped the Avengers dodge a lot of disasters. So let's hope one day Madam Web gets her time in the spotlight, because she's the unsung hero in the background who deserves a lot more love on the big screen in the foreground. And at number 1 is Black Widow. Honestly, I'm stunned that nobody mentioned Natasha Romanoff in the comments of part 1, which is surprising, because if there's any superhero who got relegated to the sidelines during the entire run of the MCU, it's Natasha Romanoff. Now, what's impressive about her is that she's just a regular human being, no superpowers. Yet she's keeping pace with all of these superhuman heavy hitters. But here's the kicker. She even went as far as to sacrifice herself during Infinity War, way before she even got her own solo film. Like, talk about a major oof. I mean, sure, eventually we got that prequel, but I mean, it would have been nice to see her come back at the end of Endgame. She deserved a lot more screen time, don't you think? You see, the strongest superheroes aren't just the ones with the flashiest powers, and Black Widow, being a human who just basically went to the gym her entire life, definitely proved that.